Rimuru, eager to properly celebrate his return, knew that dealing with Milim took priority before she caused more destruction. Moving swiftly, he grappled with her, but just as relief set in, she retaliated with a devastating headbutt, reminding him that even with pain's sense nullification, some pain could still break through. Frustrated by the repeated attacks and unwilling to endure further, he briefly considered transforming into his slime form to restrain her, though the thought of how ridiculous that would look made him hesitate. Before he could act, Feldway interjected with a complaint, challenging Rimuru's apparent composure. While it was true that Milim was still in a berserk state, she was reacting to Gaia's calls and responding to Veldora, signaling that her consciousness was gradually returning. Rimuru was confident that with time, she would come back to her senses, at which point their counterattack would begin. Though victory was never in question for him, defining the exact conditions for success was key. He dismissed Feldway's attempts to provoke him, finding amusement in the growing frustration on his enemy's face. Diablo, ever loyal, voiced his support, but Rimuru quickly noticed something alarming. Diablo was in terrible shape. His body was beginning to collapse, having sustained irreparable damage after using the void, which his body had been unable to withstand. With magical regeneration no longer an option, Diablo's complete disintegration was only a matter of time. Despite this, Diablo remained unfazed, even going so far as to accept his demise with unwavering faith that he would one day return to serve Rimuru again. Impressed by his resilience but unwilling to let him fade, Rimuru saw only one solution: using his omnipotent cells, just as he had for Zijin. Unlike with Zijin, however, he hesitated, knowing Diablo would make an unnecessary spectacle of the gesture. But as his body continued to deteriorate before him, he had no choice. Disguising a portion of his body as a recovery potion, he used teleport to ensure Feldway couldn't interfere, sending it safely into Diablo's hands. As expected, Diablo overreacted, declaring his intent to treasure it as a family heirloom until Rimuru promptly shut him down, ordering him to drink it immediately. The recovery took effect instantly, halting his collapse and fully restoring his strength, though he proclaimed that he now had nothing to fear. In the meantime, with Feldway still posing a significant threat, Diablo would be instrumental in buying time. Yet, to Rimuru's surprise, Seal revealed that Diablo's severe injuries had been self-inflicted rather than a result of Feldway's attacks, a rare miscalculation from someone usually so precise. This realization made Rimuru feel an unexpected kinship with him. After all, even Diablo wasn't perfect. Wanting to encourage him, he offered a few words of praise, which sent Diablo into an exaggerated display of joy, his enthusiasm as dramatic as ever. Streaks of tears even glistened at the corners of his eyes, a clear sign of how happy he was. Though Rimuru found it excessive, Diablo's motivation had soared, making it easy to leave Feldway to him. With his confidence reaffirmed, Rimuru entrusted the fight to Diablo and turned his attention back to Milim, determined to break her Stampede State and set her free as quickly as possible. As Rimuru continued calling out to Milim, he assessed the situation, realizing that only he, Veldora, and Gaia could provoke any reaction from her. Among them, Gaia's influence seemed the strongest, yet Milim still showed no sign of regaining her senses. Rather than resigning himself to an endless standoff, Rimuru sought a more effective approach. Recognizing the importance of reaching Milim's consciousness, he activated Argos, his surveillance magic, to display the state of the old Eurasinia. To his surprise, those previously turned into ice statues had been revived, including Frey, along with Testarossa, Sauka, Gabriel, Rain, and the others. Kara and her team had also returned to normal, a relief given the situation. However, the spell's reversal did not appear to be Velzard's doing, leaving Rimuru wondering what method had been used, as even he would have struggled to undo such magic. Seal's immediate assertion that she could have managed it did little to inspire confidence, but there was no time to argue. Reaching out to Testarossa through thought communication, he was met with a surprisingly emotional response, a clear indication of how much his sudden disappearance had worried his subordinates. Though he had only been gone briefly from his perspective, their fear of losing him had been genuine. While he felt somewhat guilty for causing unnecessary concern, he knew that Feldway was the one truly responsible, and once Milim was freed, he intended to make him answer for it. With Testarossa confirming that the battle with Velzard had been intense, but ultimately without casualties, Rimuru was able to turn his full focus back to Milim. Hoping to shake her out of her trance, he intensified his calls, reminding her that her friends were safe. Gaia echoed his pleas, adding to the pressure. Seeking to further break through to her, he invoked the possibility of Frey's tears, Karian's mockery, and even Gaia's ridicule, attempting to spark an emotional reaction. At last, something shifted. Milim, clinging to the loophole that as long as no video evidence existed, she could still complain to Rimuru, abruptly snapped back to normal. The transformation was so seamless that Rimuru was momentarily stunned. Whether it was seeing her ally's safety through Argos, hearing his words, or the persistent calls from Gaia, something had finally reached her. As the ominous energy faded, Milim fully returned to normal. Chloe and the others stared in disbelief, the sheer ease of her recovery making it all the more surreal. While Milim's return to her senses was a relief, Rimuru was unwilling to let her brush off her actions. Though she attempted to downplay the destruction she had caused, he remained firm, determined to hold her accountable. Veldora, ever carefree, tried to dismiss the matter, while Almesia, typically strict, surprisingly advocated for leniency, arguing that Milim had been manipulated and shouldn't be held responsible. Sensing support, Milim eagerly agreed, praising Almesia's understanding. However, when Almesia pointed out that Salian had suffered the most, the conversation took a turn. Rather than letting the matter go, she casually declared that Rimuru, as Milim's guardian, would naturally be responsible for covering the costs of reconstruction. Realizing he had been neatly cornered into accepting the burden, Rimuru sighed in resignation. While Milim was incapable of contributing to the repairs herself, someone had to step up, and it was clear that he had no real way to refuse. With a playful wink from Almesia sealing his fate, he reluctantly accepted his newfound responsibility, knowing that he had once again been pulled into something inescapable. With Milim finally back to her senses, the battlefield shifted, and Feldway's frustration was evident. However, Diablo remained vigilant, keeping him completely contained, preventing any further interference. Meanwhile, Chloe and Veldora, drained from the prolonged struggle, collapsed onto the sacred tree's leaves, completely exhausted. Just as Rimuru was assessing the situation, news arrived that Milim had also caused a commotion at Heaven Tower. Though she vehemently denied any involvement, the overwhelming evidence pointed to her guilt, with even Almesia confirming that she had unleashed Drago Nova there. With no way to defend her actions, Rimuru sighed and activated Argos, his surveillance magic, to check the state of the battlefield. The sight that unfolded was sheer chaos. Forces from across the world had converged in battle, and a large-scale war was underway. Luminous, having taken command, was leading the defense against invaders from another world. Forced into action as other key figures were occupied. Guy was focused on Velzard, Leon was here, Ramiris was preoccupied in the labyrinth, and Milim had been out of control. With no one else available, Luminous had shouldered the burden of holding the line. Rimuru silently acknowledged her efforts, knowing that her intervention had likely prevented a catastrophe. Meanwhile, Almesia, seething with frustration, directed her anger at Feldway, blaming him for orchestrating the chaos and even pinning Milim's rampage on him, an accusation that Milim eagerly agreed with to absolve herself of responsibility. Rimuru, however, understood that this was a crisis that needed to be handled swiftly. Determined to take Feldway down, he prepared for battle, and Milim, now fully energized, stood ready to assist. However, Sylvia unexpectedly intervened with a warning. Feldway's current form bore a striking resemblance to Veldanava, the Star King Dragon. Though Rimuru had previously dismissed Feldway's appearance as nothing more than a cool aesthetic, this revelation suddenly added weight to the confrontation. Milim, upon hearing the comparison, showed no emotional response, simply acknowledging that she had no memories of her father and thus felt no attachment. With that settled, Rimuru solidified their strategy. Once Feldway was defeated, he would assist Guy, while Milim would head to Heaven Tower to help stabilize the situation. Though Milim initially suggested rescuing Frey and the others, Rimuru reminded her that they had already been freed and that her efforts would be better spent elsewhere, particularly since she had a reputation to repair after her rampage. She reluctantly agreed, showing a vague understanding of the severity of the situation. Veldora, meanwhile, attempted to excuse himself by volunteering to accompany Milim, a blatant attempt to avoid direct combat. Seeing through his motives, Rimuru warned him about Velgrin's presence at Heaven Tower, pointing out that she was tense and highly alert. More than just battle readiness, she seemed wary of someone. Following her gaze, Rimuru noticed an unsettling presence, a small child sitting atop the shoulder of a massive beast, her legs idly swinging. The sight was so bizarrely out of place that it sent a chill through the battlefield. Seal quickly identified the entity as Ivarage, the world-destroying dragon, confirming that they had long passed the point of preventing its manifestation. Now, the only options were to either defeat or drive it away. Veldora, suddenly far less confident, muttered weak reassurances about not angering his sister, but his hesitation was palpable. Regardless, that was his problem to deal with. With final words of caution about Ivarage's strength, Rimuru left the matter to Milim and Veldora, confident that the two of them together could manage. With that settled, he turned his attention back to Feldway, ready to engage. Yet, as he prepared to back up Diablo, he realized the fight was already reaching its conclusion. Feldway, whom Rimuru had expected to be a major obstacle, had been completely dominated. Diablo had overwhelmed him with sheer, unrelenting force. The battle had become entirely one-sided, and as Rimuru and the others looked on in astonishment, it was clear that Feldway's defeat was imminent.